Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we have had a very grand opening this morning and also the nice breakfast. So I guess energy is back for us to continue the next very exciting session. And this session, it is so special because we are going to look at the world from the views outside the region, actually. When we say outside the region, Australia should be part of the region as well. Yeah. And the topic of this conversation is about the peace, stability, and prosperity in Asia Pacific. Most of the people here are the business leaders. We know that every day we are confronted with a situation that require us to make judgment call, and that require us to also understand the macro and micro situations affecting whatever the situation we are in. So today we're going to have a chance to hear from three very distinguished speakers who have vast experience in the various topics, of course being the ambassadors, high commissioners of the different, the major countries being so-called also based here. The first one on my right is His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, the High Commissioner of Australia to Malaysia. Please welcome Dr. Justin Lee. And on my left is His Excellency, I'm trying to pronounce it correctly, hopefully, His Excellency Roland Galharague, the Ambassador of France to Malaysia. Welcome. It is worthwhile to mention that today in Hsinchu, the front page, you see the report of His Excellency Roland Galharague's visits to the Hsinchu and also shared his view. And on my far left is a very important ambassador, ambassador of European Union to Malaysia, His Excellency Michalis Rokas. The format is going to be very simple. We're going to invite each of the excellencies to use 5 minutes to share with us the worldview and how it relates to Asia Pacific. And since we have been receiving a lot of news from the media, and we would like to invite our speakers to also share with us the insights that we usually will not hear from the media. And that hopefully will become more useful in educating us about what's really going on. And we all are kind of expecting that the situation will continue to be very dynamic, and the true situation may be very different from what has been spoken about and discussed about. So we are fortunate to have the three very distinguished speakers here. And I'd like to kickstart immediately by inviting His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee to take the 5 minutes to share with us.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dato. And can I also acknowledge my very good friends, Ambassador Roland and Ambassador Michalis from France and the European Union, respectively, and also express my appreciation to KSI for the invitation to be here today and to speak on this panel, and give my regards to everybody who is joining us. Just in terms of some short comments, I guess I'd first like to say just how appropriate the topic of this summit is, the Great Reset. It's very apt, given the circumstances that we've experienced over the last 3 years with COVID-19, to be considering some of the impacts of that, but also some of the other longer-term trends that are still with us. And it's an appropriate time for all of our governments within the region, also for Malaysia in particular, and Australia and other countries, to be thinking about how we readjust and reset at this time. I'd just like to make a couple of observations that I will address and might be subject for further conversation. My first is that recent events really have shown that international and global events do have regional and local impacts that we can't ignore. I guess that'll be one of my key observations to start with this morning. For example, no country has been able to cut itself off from the impacts of COVID-19. It's been a global pandemic, as we've all seen. We've tried to close our borders to reduce the health impacts of that, but nonetheless, the pandemic has impacted us all, both from a health perspective, and we've not been able to keep our borders closed for economic reasons. We've all had to eventually reopen our borders as well. So clearly, this has been a global pandemic of far-reaching impact and has affected all of our countries. Similarly, if we look at one of the other issues that is occurring at the moment, and more recently, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has also demonstrated the cost to us all, not just of Ukraine itself, of allowing one state to dominate another. And while that conflict might seem far away, it's also having real impacts on Malaysia, Australia, and the region, including through what we're seeing in terms of inflationary pressures, including on key commodities as well as household staples, which we're experiencing here in Malaysia as well around cooking oil and wheat. And also that conflict is having broader impacts and broader implications for universal principles, for example, on sovereignty, territorial integrity and the rule of law, and on the international order and multilateral system on which we all rely, including in this region for our peace, stability and prosperity. So it's clear that these global impacts and global events are having impacts upon the region. My second observation is that while COVID-19 and the conflict in Ukraine is attracting the headlines at the moment, there's other longer-term trends that are continuing, and that there continue to be common threats and challenges that we're all experiencing. Foremost amongst those, and these won't be a surprise to any of you, I'm sure you've spoken about them already, include climate change and the challenge of transitioning to a net zero future. Other issues such as cyber attacks, both from state and non-state actors, misinformation and disinformation, the rise of economic protectionism, ensuring the resilience of supply chains, escalating tensions over territorial claims, and again, increasing pressure on rules, norms and institutions. So there's lots of ongoing trends and challenges that we're continuing to see, as well as the immediate. I just wanted to touch on, in these introductory remarks, Australia's approach to work with Malaysia and our neighbours in the region to address these common challenges and especially to build our respective resilience to them on both the global and regional issues. We recognise that our national interest and our security and stability is based on the prosperity and stability of the Indo Pacific region, and that has been recognised by our new government, which was just sworn in last week. Just some of the things that our new government has already said: they've committed to deepening engagement with Southeast Asia, including through the appointment of a special envoy to Southeast Asia, establishing an office of Southeast Asia in our foreign ministry, and also increasing our development funding. And our new government's indicated that we want to take much more ambitious action, both domestically and internationally, on climate change, including by reducing our emissions by 43% by 2030 to get to that pathway of net zero by 2050. And working with countries in the region, including Malaysia, to exchange technologies and experiences. Beyond that, as I've said, building our respective resilience to address the common challenges that we face by cooperating more on economic, energy, cyber and health security are all priorities. And importantly, we want to continue to work with the countries of the region through regional architecture. So whether that being continuing to recognise ASEAN centrality, working through APEC and other regional institutions. All of that builds on the already close cooperation that we have with Malaysia, and especially through our comprehensive strategic partnership, which we agreed last year, which is focused particularly around economic prosperity, science and innovation, and defence and security cooperation. And especially on the economic side, we think that that's a very important area to continue to work on, whether it be through our bilateral FTAs or through RCEP and the CPTPP. So that's all I'll say, Dato, in my introductory comments. Very much hoping to continue to work and work with Malaysia, and happy to talk further about some of those issues that we've put on the table. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Justin Lee. And next, I'd like to invite His Excellency Roland Galharague to continue the 5 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Dato Wei, and good morning to all of you. Let me start by obviously expressing my thanks to KSI for having me here today. I'm looking forward to our upcoming discussion, but I have prepared some remarks that I will now deliver. Essentially 3 points. My first point is quite obviously why we believe that this region, which is called Asia Pacific in the seminar today, but we call the Indo Pacific, why this region has the potential to be the powerhouse of the 21st century. That's my first point. Second point, I would like to go through some of the challenges that the region is facing. And third, and perhaps most importantly, my last point will be to explain why I believe that the EU and this region, or the EU and ASEAN, and certainly the EU and Malaysia, are natural partners. So let me start by restating the obvious. It's actually a bit of a cliche to say that the 21st century is bound to be the Asian century. But like so many other cliches, it is actually true. And it is true for a number of reasons. One is, of course, purely a matter of size and importance. The region comprises 3/5 of the world population, 60% of the world GDP, and has provided 2/3 of the world's growth before the pandemic. And even during and after the pandemic, if you look at the statistics, the region has actually outperformed the rest of the world. And if you look at the growth prospects in the region today, they're actually double than some in other regions, mine including. The region is also home to 7 members of the G20 and to the biggest trade agreements in the world, RCEP and CPTPP. It also comprises vital waterways for global trade, including the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Malacca Straits, of course, and the South China Sea. Finally, the region is also at the forefront of the digital economy and can boast a young, educated workforce as well as a growing middle class. So all in all, a powerhouse for the development of the world. Let's look now at the challenges, and here again, I will only repeat some of the points that my friend and colleague Justin has just made. At the top of the list of the challenges, obviously, is global warming and the disastrous effects it is having. Climate change and rising sea levels are compounded by over and illegal fishing, plastic pollution. Pressure will increase on marine biodiversity, even as the region is home to some of the most vital biodiversity places, such as the Coral Triangle. Natural resources and fish stocks are already under stress. The potential negative consequences of climate change for the local populations are equally dire, with loss of livelihoods, loss of life, mass migrations, and potentially conflicts. Second, the Indo-Pacific also serves as a theater for increasing geopolitical tensions. The region has witnessed a rise in military spending from 20% of world military expenditure in 2009 to 28% in 2019. The number of skirmishes, incidents, and risky behavior has risen, in particular in regional flashpoints such as the East and South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. A bloc-to-bloc approach to regional security is emerging, while plans for a regional collective security architecture have yet to materialize. I will perhaps skip the immediate economic effects of the conflict of the war against Ukraine that Justin has just mentioned. There are other structural economic challenges, one of them being, of course, the state of the Chinese economy, especially the real estate crisis, the financial risks that are annexed to that crisis, and of course the worrying tendency of an increasing closure of China. But finally, I cannot not talk to what I would call the potential systemic consequences of the aggression against Ukraine. The unprovoked and unjustified war which Russia chose to launch against Ukraine, which I will recall was found illegal by the International Court of Justice, is an exceptional breach of all international legal norms. It jeopardizes the basis on which the security of all states, including all states in this region, the Indo-Pacific, is currently resting. I would like to commend Malaysia for having acknowledged this fact and having helped us isolate Russia with her votes in the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and the IAEA. Let me perhaps, in closing, against this very challenging and fraught background, say in a few minutes why I'm convinced that the EU and the Indo-Pacific, the EU and ASEAN, and the EU and Malaysia are natural partners. First of all, we should not forget that we share a common history from the mythical origins of Malay dynasties. If you read Sejarah Melayu, you will find that there is reference to Alexander the Great as the start of all Malay dynasties. Through the time of the great discoveries and Magellan travels to decolonization and the advent of modernity, we do share a common history, at times a painful one, but one which is powerful enough to have left durable imprints on our respective cultures. I will also mention that we also share a common geography with some of the outermost region of the EU being located in this region, and Indo-Pacific. New Caledonia, for instance, comes to mind. But more importantly, perhaps, we also share common interests. The EU is the top investor, the leading provider of development cooperation, and one of the biggest trading partners of the Indo-Pacific region. Together, the Indo-Pacific and Europe account for over 70% of global trade in goods and services and over 60% of foreign direct investment flows. Trade between the Indo-Pacific and Europe are higher than between any other geographical regions in the world. 1 trillion euros in 2019. 40% of the EU trades goes through the Straits of Malacca. The EU is the third largest trade partner of this country, Malaysia. But even more importantly, I believe that ASEAN and the EU, Malaysia and the EU, share a common vision. And here I would point to a recent speech that the Prime Minister of Malaysia has given to the Nikkei conference in Japan a couple of days ago. We could entirely subscribe to what the Prime Minister of Malaysia has said in this speech, in particular his emphasis on regional cooperation and his emphasis on, and I quote, the need to unite to fight climate change. I think Malaysia, as the EU, as my country, oppose a world order where might would be right. We want to keep this region open, inclusive, and free. This is the fundamental rationale which has led us collectively as the EU to put together an Indo Pacific strategy for cooperation, which we are now starting to implement. And we look forward to growing engagement between this region and the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency Roland Galharague. I think you leave us with a lot of ideas, and we will revisit that in a short while. And right now, I'd like to invite His Excellency Michalis Rokas to share your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato Wei, and also my sincere thanks to KSI for organizing this event today. And of course, I want also to acknowledge my good friends, Ambassadors Dr. Justin and Roland. Being the last to intervene, it's a challenge not to repeat what was said, but I would agree and subscribe to whatever was explained on the challenges and the way ahead. Obviously, we all are living crucial moments. It is by many, it was said, the war, all-front war that in Ukraine, it is a watershed moment. And major geopolitical shifts are occurring. And of course, in the backdrop of that is how our societies react and how we are able to give into our arsenal new tools to be able to confront such crises, such watershed moments. And of course, the world is still in pain to recover from COVID-19. And then it comes this totally unprovoked aggression and war against Ukraine to further inflict immense pain in the world population with big disruptions in supply chains, with price hikes, and of course a huge food security issue. So we cannot stay idle against this backdrop. And of course the European Union didn't wait until this war in order to give new policies in our arsenal and suggest new partnership to to nations across the world, and especially in the Indo-Pacific. I would like to say that for us, these tools are tools of friendship, cooperation, and partnership. We launched our Indo-Pacific strategy, which it is a response to the region and to the huge importance that it plays for us. 40% of our trade goes through, 70% of our trade goes through the Indo-Pacific, and 40% goes through these shores where Malaysia is. So it is huge, and any disruption on supply chains or any instability in the region will affect directly Europe. So there is no such a thing that the war in Ukraine is too far away, or whatever happens in the Indo-Pacific is too far away for us. We are interdependent. Therefore, we want to create a true partnership with the nations of the Indo-Pacific, and I really think that Malaysia is a big priority for us, not only because it is geographic location, but it is a principled stance, and because of the fact that it aspires the same values that we do. So since the topic of the conference today is about security, maybe I would say a few words why it is important for us to maintain what we call a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region. I acknowledge just the importance of this region for our prosperity, for our common prosperity, but also there is need to reinforce the partnerships that we have. So because we have a big stake, we want first to strengthen the international trade against unfair practices. We want to strengthen ocean governance in the region in full compliance with international law, in particular the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea. We want that to promote regional security architecture, including securing sea lines of communication and enhancing security presence in the Indo-Pacific. We want also to continue to fight against illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing and implement sustainable fisheries partnership agreements. We want to support the nations of the Indo-Pacific, and I'm also always, this is also for Malaysia, in its goal to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and of course the fight against climate change. And also we want to improve connectivity between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. So now we have also the tools in our disposal. We have what we call the Global Gateway, which can mobilize up to 300 billion euros, 1.5 trillion ringgit for projects around the world, and we are actively now looking how, and this, in which areas, and could be connectivity, digital, green, but also security issues. And I would like to finish that beside that we have the strategic compass, which enhances our strategic security and defense capabilities. And we have also a newly established EU-ASEAN strategic partnership, and we are going to commemorate a summit, 45-year friendship with ASEAN countries this December in Brussels at head of state and government level. I can come into more details after in the Q&A if the audience so would wish, but I would like to finish with what is our motto, what is different in this partnership that we extend to our friendly nations in the Indo-Pacific, including Malaysia. Our motto, it is always to cooperate where it is possible and where our partners want to cooperate, but also to defend our rights. We have to do that. So we are not in the process of creating naval bases or permanent structures in the Indo-Pacific, but we would like to participate in common exercises, in military training, boosting intelligence and exchanges with nations. We want to reevaluate our collective security. I just mentioned how interlinked, interwoven those relations are. And we want also to boost our supply chains, because that, when we have true partnerships in that regard, then we can call both Malaysia and ourselves, we have strategic autonomy, because it is based on friendship and true partnership. So we have the means for that. It is an open-end cooperation. We are in the process of outlining this to all walks of life here in Malaysia. And of course, on the way ahead, we are really looking forward to consolidate these partnerships in the days and weeks to come. And I'm very much looking to the opportunity of the EU-ASEAN summit end of the year, where we should expect some announcements in that regard. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. His Excellency Michalis Rokas. Well, we have heard from, the Excellency Dr. Jocelyn Lee about Australia with the new government also announcing re-engaging Southeast Asia and in the various aspects. We very much welcome that. We have also heard from our French ambassador, His Excellency Roland Galharague, about the various situations that actually, in his opinion, would call for a greater cooperation between EU and ASEAN, and in this case Malaysia as well. And the last part, not the least, we have heard from His Excellency Michalis Rokas from EU's perspective that talk about their various disruption in terms of food security, in terms of supply chain, that more than ever it calls for that that new mode of they call cooperation, and there a lot of readiness to cooperate in many fronts, in trade and so on, and security as well, right? I think with all this backdrop, it seems we are facing a huge dynamic ahead of us, and I think the dynamic will continue to simmer through in the considerable future. I'd like to zoom in a little bit more about the supply chain as well as inflation, because our topic has a lot to do with economics and also the entrepreneurship in this region, right? And supply chain causes a lot of disruption in almost so many aspects of our industries, our businesses, our economy, and then inflation is actually threatening to actually kind of cause that shift in policies, monetary policies, and so forth. So I'd like to hear your views in regard to this supply chain and inflation. I think we shall go around the same sequence, all right?
No, thank you very much. And absolutely, supply chains, as we've indicated, have been a major issue and clearly have been very exposed as a result of COVID-19 and other events, as we've already discussed. I think going forward, and certainly for the Australian government, if we're looking at resilience of our countries and looking at resilience of our economies, how we manage our supply chains is fundamentally important, how we go forward with that. I think there's a number of things that we hope would occur. In the short term, obviously, borders reopening, flights resuming, all of that is important. I know here in Malaysia, in my conversations with business, I think air freight is still a major issue. Containers are still major issues, 300 to 500% increases in the cost of freight. So I think there's still some way to go, and hopefully the short-term issues will be addressed by improved connectivity in the short term. But I think we've been more exposed and in the longer term, and I know there are conversations now occurring within countries around what are your critical products that you need, what are the critical supply chains that you really need to focus on. And I know within Australia also, we're having a conversation around, well, what do you need to do more domestically to support your domestic manufacturing? What can you produce more yourselves? That won't overcome all of the problem, but it is something that needs to be looked at. And I know countries like Australia and Malaysia, we're both agricultural countries, we're very dependent on fertilizer, for example. So I think identifying what are the key products for your economies and then how you support the supply chain around that is another piece of strategic consideration that countries need to do. And looking at either where you source it and how you improve your domestic manufacturing is important. I think also, as I mentioned, we have to try and prevent a protectionist response to the issue. We want that markets will remain open, and we again remain concerned where countries might seek to, for whatever reason, it might be an issue just of maintaining their own supply, it might be also trying to exercise leverage, but where countries then seek to stop free trade and limit the supply of goods and services. I think that means for all of us we have to look at diverse markets, we have to look at continued diversification around the supply chains, and we have to look at how we continue to support that, and whether that be through FTAs, and whether that be through the WTO, keep those supply chains open. So I think there's a range of things that we can do there, but I think they're all important issues. Thanks.
Before moving on, I'd just like to follow through with that, what you have said, Excellency. You know, when the country like Australia look at more domestic manufacturing and reduce the critical so-called, the reliance on the critical supplies from others, it will also mean that self-reliance policy to be enacted, right? Does it mean it is going to kind of create the new situation whereby instead of globalization, it is more of de-globalization? And what would be the impact of that? I think I'm arguing against that. I think, of course, countries need to look at what capacities they have domestically, and one of the other critical supply chains is around rare earths, and I know that's been there's a project here in Malaysia that also contributes to the rare earth supply chain. We think that is an important supply chain, and countries have got important roles in that. But I do think that we need to try and, as I say, prevent protectionist measures, try and keep markets open, try and diversify our markets, but also look at reliable suppliers of goods and services and products as well, and encourage countries to be reliable. And again, from Australia's perspective, particularly around agricultural commodities and food products, and we would see ourselves as being a very reliable supplier, including to Malaysia, of wheat, of meat, of other products. So trying to encourage countries to be reliable and to remain open so that we can continue to contribute to those supply chains. Thanks. Right, thank you. Next, Excellency Galharague, about supply chain and inflation.
Well, thank you. I think Justin is actually quite right. I would perhaps see a difference between three levels. During the pandemic, of course, we've seen disruptions of supply chains, which, if you may want to call accidental. Lockdowns resulted in factories being shut, hence disruptions in supply chain. And here I would like to note the great dedication of the Malaysian government and the efforts they made to maintain some of the more critical industries able to continue to work even during the downs. That's one level. And then it's of course a finer and perhaps more difficult distinction between, on the one hand, the increasing trend to autonomy, which we are witnessing around the world, local production being now encouraged in many countries, many areas, not just Europe or Asia, really around the world. It's a very fine line with a handling of supply chains which would be used to extract geopolitical advantage, geopolitical leverage. And I think that the view that we share in the EU being essentially also a trade power and one of the biggest single and open markets in the world, the view is that essentially it's not illegitimate to want to enjoy a level of strategic autonomy, if you want. But this has to go together with an effort to maintain connectivity, because as we've seen in the first part of this conversation, we're all dependent one on the other. So this is the fine distinction to make, I think, between what is legitimate reshoring, if to use the American vocabulary, and what is perhaps not so legitimate geopolitical use of supply chains. Thank you.
Just to follow on quickly, you touch on that reshoring and also not to use supply chain to gain the geopolitical advantage. If I may just kind of put this question about sanction, of which that there is being kind of enforced in many countries against the perpetrator of this the war in Ukraine, right? So wouldn't that also constitute one form of the so-called geopolitical advantage through sanction?
Well, two things here. First of all, I mean, the aim of the sanctions is simply to prevent the further financing of the Russian war machine. It's very simple. That's point one. Point two, if you look at the situation in agriculture, for instance, and the crisis that we are undergoing when it comes to the accessibility of grain, for instance, wheat, corn, etc. This is not caused by sanctions. There are no agricultural sanctions. This is caused simply by the Russians blockading the export from Ukraine, which we are currently, together with the United Nations, trying to overcome. But I think what I have in mind, if you want, is when I talk about the geopolitical use of supply chains, I think we all have an interest in preventing a situation where you would have rival blocks, which would be not only geopolitical blocks, but also financial or currency blocks. This, I think, would be essentially detrimental to the world. And for a country like Malaysia, whose prosperity is essentially premised on its ability to trade with different worlds, this, frankly, would be a very dire situation, which I think we must fight to avoid. Thank you.
So I think just to follow on the block, the either currency block or geopolitical block, is that avoidable given the current so-called development, and how to de-escalate that?
Yes, I think it's pretty avoidable. If you look at the attitude of China, for instance, in the Russian vis-à-vis the Russian aggression, it's very noteworthy that China did not vote with Russia at the Security Council. It's very also noteworthy that the economy of China is, of course, immensely bigger than the Russian economy, and therefore much more aware that it needs to be inserted in a world that has to be, to some extent, globalized. That's the big difference. So yes, I think it's avoidable.
Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Excellency Michalis.
Yes, I can't agree more with what Ambassador Roland said. Actually, this is a key point, because what we see now, it is that Russia is weaponizing the food security and could create world hunger. And this is very important. But also we see, and we are talking about facts, that even if in the European Union, in Malaysia, we are hopeful that we have transited through COVID or we are on the way out, you see that the policy in China of zero COVID, how immensely disrupts the supply chains. It is a new reality that we need to face. Therefore, the issue of supply chains can only be secured on the principle of reliable supply chains. And how do you do that? And how we would like to do this in the EU? I mean, before COVID, we woke up suddenly and we realized that 93% of our surgical gloves come from Malaysia. It was a fact, it's something very good, but there was no agreement on what would happen if this ever would be disrupted. A massive amount, I think it's over 80% of our personal protective equipment comes from Malaysia. So these are facts, and there is no shifts after what has happened because of COVID or the war in Ukraine to move towards autarky. This cannot happen. But we'd like to secure the supply chains by creating true partnership. And these are happening. It is not only on a give and take. It is also how we can bring to our partners, and this is what the European Union wants to do, the things that they need. So Malaysia, just to give an example, is blessed with natural resources. If we are to create such partnership, we can bring the EU know-how to implement in Malaysia about greening the economy, about bringing the sustainable development goals, about bringing the renewables, securing. So we could do, this is the way that supply chain partnerships for us, for the European Union, would work in the future. But we need absolutely to take note of the geopolitical shifts and how some countries, unfortunately, are seeking to exert geopolitical influence and leverage by using these important supply chains.
Yeah. Thank you, Excellency. So we learned that, to have that so-called assurance of supply chain through partnership, it is actually one key formula. I think along with that, I'd like to move on to the last question before opening to the floor for maybe a few questions. That is about, looking at Asia Pacific, true partnership could actually mean finding the commonalities and finding the common opportunities. Where do you see will be that, the new impetus for the economy to kind of come together in this so-called Asia century, as I've spoken, such that it can bring prosperity to the region and also to the world? Which are the common opportunities, common areas? I'd like to hear your view. I think with that, same sequence,
I'll
right?
be very quick, because I'm sure the views from the floor. I think as we've already discussed, in addressing the challenges, there are enormous opportunities, and some of those areas, aside from our very close economic relations, I think that the challenges in themselves present opportunities. So climate change, for example, developing low emissions technologies, Australia and Malaysia and other countries in the region as well. We're very similar. We're oil and gas. Malaysia's oil and gas. We're gas and other fossil fuel producing countries. We need to transition our economies. We need to go to a lower emissions, bring in low emissions technologies. That's going to be a requirement. We know that industry is very interested in what can be done in that sector, very interested in green power, a lot of conversations around hydrogen. Malaysia can have a potential big role in that, particularly with the green power out of Sarawak. So I think there's an enormous range of opportunities in addressing climate change and in the low emissions technology space and energy transition. Similarly, I think in cyber, we've talked a little bit about cyber security, a really high priority for the private sector and government. But also beyond that is the whole space of digitisation. I think we saw through COVID the importance of digitisation, of e-trading, of keeping the economy moving through those platforms. There's great opportunities to further develop them now. And health as well, developing vaccines, mRNA vaccines, genomic sequencing. So all of the challenges that we've gone through have actually developed a whole range of areas which are really important for that resilience, as we're talking about, and further cooperation in them, and lots of economic opportunities out of those as well.
Wow, it's encouraging to hear that, we actually share a lot more in common in fighting climate change, in embracing green the kind of technology and green energy, to embrace cybersecurity simply because we are now into a very digitalized world, instead of globalized world, but very digitalized. So therefore, cyber security is one main common interest, and health is another common topic for us to develop as well. Thank you. Next, Excellency Galharague.
Oh, I agree entirely with what Justin has just said. It's not perhaps completely realized that we are witnessing a fourth industrial revolution, and the driver for this fourth industrial revolution is precisely turning around our economies to make them green. And this has lots of implications in all fields of economic activity, whether it's building, whether it is mobility, whether it is town planning, whether it is smart cities, etc., etc. This is certainly the top number one item on the domestic agenda of the EU. The whole economic policy of the EU is premised on this notion of green transition. And it's also a field where, because perhaps we started a bit earlier, we have gained some experience, and this is exactly what we want to share with our partners in the Indo Pacific. Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah. So for the whole region to grow together, to embrace the 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution, there are various aspects to kind of expand and grow together, as well as the transition into the green economy. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. Australia is not a member of the European Union, but the priorities are the same. It is clear that the sustainable and inclusive prosperity, which includes the achievement of the SDGs by 2030, is one area. Green transition and circular economy, it is another very important. Ocean governance, I spoke before about it. Digital governance and the respective partnerships that we can forge. Connectivity, which brings also the infrastructure and connectivity. Security and defense. And obviously human security. We're talking about health and the effects of COVID. So these are, I would say, our 7 priorities as the European Union in the Indo-Pacific, and this is what we are going to work, and hopefully we will launch this kind of partnership at the EU-ASEAN Summit, which is always, for us, ASEAN centrality is a key component of any partnership in the Indo-Pacific.
ASEAN being a key component in this, the cooperation, right? In connectivity, from trade to connectivity to security and defense, right? Right. Thank you. I think we have heard from our distinguished speakers about the various views about the geopolitical situation, economics, and how it could affect us, right? I'd like to open the floor to any question that you may have. Please use a mic there and state your name and your question, if there's any question. We have the last few minutes, actually.
Testing, mic 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
All right, here. All right. Thank you, Excellencies. My name is Alisa Shafiqah. I'm from Malaysian Youth Diplomacy. So I have a quick question. So one of the items to watch for ASEAN, or more specifically in the Indo-Pacific region, has been focusing on the US-led security architecture initiatives like Quad and AUKUS. So in this case, what role does France have to put in this approach? And perhaps with the new government, are there any new approach that Australia also want to bring into the Indo-Pacific area? Thank you.
Wow, okay, that is a very interesting question, Quad and AUKUS, right? So I think that question, even though you channel to our French ambassador, I think equally is important for the High Commissioner of Australia to say a few words there. Maybe we start with...
No, I want to immediately relieve you of any anxiety. We're not planning to join AUKUS.
Well, I think, is there any further view from that, apart from not joining?
I mean, our view of the security in the region is absolutely within the framework of the EU Indo-Pacific Strategy. We think that it is absolutely paramount to preserve freedom of navigation, for instance. So we will continue within this framework to conduct the operations which we are conducting in full accordance with international law and the law of the seas to make sure that the waterways remain open. We will coordinate our presence with our other fellow EU member states. We have just agreed in the EU to launch a so-called coordinated maritime presence, which we have already actually implemented in other regions of the world, notably the Gulf of Guinea. We will do this also in the Indo Pacific. And other than that, of course, we will rely on the existing multilateral mechanism.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. We hear the view. The interest is to keep the region free and open for all the kind of trade, sea routes, and so on. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I understand the question was around the Quad and AUKUS. So very much we support that exact same objective around a free, open, inclusive, resilient region. For our new government and our Prime Minister and Foreign Minister were just at the Quad meeting very recently. It was one of the first things that they did. And the things that I've already said around what the new government's priorities are, around those areas of security, economic, energy, health, cyber, they all fit very much within the Quad's agenda. So our government remains very supportive of the practical agenda that the Quad countries are pursuing, including Australia. Again, our approach is to work closely with the region, to be a partner with the countries of the region, and provide all of us opportunities to work together with a range of partners. So that's really the intention. You know, we want an inclusive region where everybody participates in the region, where everybody supports one another to build resilience in one another's countries. And the Quad has a very practical agenda around that. It's an agenda which brings in countries. It encourages the United States, Japan, India, and Australia to partner with countries in the region in a range of areas. It's spoken a lot about vaccine delivery. It's spoken a lot about combating climate change, infrastructure and critical emerging technologies, cybersecurity, and humanitarian and disaster relief. So the intention there, again, is to have a range of partners that can work with countries in the region to deliver on their priorities and to build that resilience.
Just to follow on that, Quad seems to be more of the kind of economic strategic alliance, right? And then AUKUS seems to be more of the defense and security kind of the arrangement, of which it is perhaps more similar to NATO. Yeah. So how would you see that kind of affecting positively or negatively the region in Asia where we are in?
On AUKUS, you know, it is ultimately a technology transfer arrangement between three countries, primarily around nuclear-powered submarines for Australia, for Australia's national interests and defence needs. Again, we're a country surrounded by ocean. Submarines have always been very important to us. This is a technology transfer agreement that supports that, but also supports technology transfer in a range of other areas, so quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, cyber security as well. So it's primarily that. It's not a new alliance. We already have an alliance arrangement with the United States. We already have other alliance arrangements with other countries. It is primarily about technology transfer based on what Australia sees as its needs for its national interest and its defence.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, the next question, Tan Sri Robert Pang.
No need to call me Tan Sri, just call me Uncle. Very interesting because we welcome everybody here today. The question that I want to ask, Malaysia is really in a very wonderful shape. So will all these investors, this Excellency will encourage people to invest in Malaysia for that matter. Because we have to move forward, we need to economy drive the growth. And how do we go about it, Mr. Moderator? Please emphasize on that. Let us have some feel on it. Thank you. You don't understand my question? How best can Malaysia help to promote and invite foreigners to come in?
Okay, your question, Uncle Tan Sri.
Economic and entrepreneurship.
It's about to invite more investors to come in.
Yes.
How do we invite more investors?
We need
to come
them.
In? Well, it's a part and parcel of the what I call economy and also peace and stability. So, and I'd like to invite a quick remarks from.
Most definitely, already the European Union countries account for 20% of foreign direct investment into Malaysia, which we are number one.
Thank you.
And this shows that we trust Malaysia for EU businesses and for the supply chain. But there is a lot more potential, and we most definitely looking at it. And the issue is that we do not have a free trade agreement yet, which would facilitate a great deal more investments, because free trade agreements, they are not only boosting trade in goods and services, but also they create appropriate conditions for investments and access to public procurement. We had started many years ago. It was the negotiations. They were frozen back in 2013. But now, as Malaysia moves ahead, you have ratified the RCEP. There is discussion that the CTPP will be ratified this year. And I think this is one piece of the puzzle that is missing. Most definitely, a free trade agreement would would enhance further EU investments. But in the meantime, as we spoke about the supply chain, and I have to admit, in my various trips in the regions of Malaysia, states, but also the federal government, are very keen into enhancing EU presence, especially bringing our competitive edge on green technologies, circular economy, and digitalization. Therefore, these are the areas where we will look for the conditions for further investments. And most definitely, Malaysia is a key area where we look to bring more investments in this country. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Excellency. Yeah.
One more question.
Yes.
With the current political stability in Malaysia, atmosphere, can we still invite a lot of people coming in to invest?
The question is about, with political stability or otherwise, would investors still come into Malaysia and perhaps,
Thank you.
Yeah, this region. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, already the fact that we are number one in FDI in the country, it shows that regardless of what you perceive as political stability, Malaysia is a very attractive country. The European Chamber of Commerce and the national chambers are in good partnership with the federal government in discussions and in the various states. We are checking the opportunities. So I don't think that what matters, it is so much the political stability. What matters is the fundamentals of the investments, the rule of law, which is a key component, and the openness of the society. So in that regard, I trust that Malaysia will continue to be a trusted partner of EU investments.
Well, thank you, Excellency. So Malaysia will continue to be a trusted partner, and also I like to believe that the whole region, as a growing region, is going to be a trusted region as well for various purposes. I think with that, we actually come to the end of this session already. Thank you very much, Uncle Tan Sri, for your question.
I just want to have one more question.
can we
Thank
do
you
it
very much
very
for the
quick one?
speaker.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the speaker who has just illustrated about Malaysia. We welcome more people like you to understand us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think to close the session, I just would like to invite each and every speaker here to just have one sentence to kind of close with regard to your aspiration for the Asia economy and also the peace, stability, and prosperity.
One sentence. I just want to add on investment. We see a lot of opportunities in Australia, for Australia, companies to invest here, and we're encouraging them at the moment. We have a lot of potential in value adding. So Australian products, particularly commodities, coming to Malaysia and being value added here in Malaysia. You'll have a very good cost structure for our companies. So value adding onto wheat, value adding onto cheese. I've been to all these places in Malaysia, and there's very big scope for value adding here. But also bring in products which are then manufactured in a halal way for halal markets. So that's something else that we're doing. And the other area of cooperation is in the next generation technologies. So things like data centers. We mentioned digitization. If Malaysia can build that whole ecosystem of industries that support digitalization and the digital economy, including data centers. We have a lot of interest from companies in Australia. I know there's interest from other companies. There's lots of potential growth areas as well. But my one sentence just would be for all colleagues in Malaysia to really recognise really the agency that Malaysia has. I think in my opening comments, I said that global issues really do impact upon the region. We can't ignore that. And although we look at the Asia Pacific or the Indo Pacific, we should be looking at the world. And Malaysia, as a very influential country in the world, has a lot of agency. And we always like to hear Malaysia's voice on the international stage. So that's my hope for the future, that we can work with Malaysia to really elevate Malaysia's aspirations and objectives for the world. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much with aspiration. Next, Excellency Galharague.
In one sentence, I think perhaps even I'll try to give a very short sentence, so perhaps just 2 words. Jom bersama. Jom bersama. Let's go together.
Jom bersama.
Jom
Wow.
bersama. Let's go
Jom
together.
bersama.
I think we have seen during this panel that there's a lot of potential. We agree on a number of things. Just think about us, the Europeans. We are not far away. Actually, we are part of your region. We are part of this world. Let's work more together. Thank you.
Thank you. Jom bersama. And then finally, Excellency Michalis.
Definitely a strong belief in partnership with Malaysia in the areas that I mentioned in my previous points, whether it is green, whether it is digital, whether it is cyber, whether it is human capital, whether it is ocean governance, whether it is the achievement of the SDGs, and the list is long. So most definitely we look to work hand in hand towards achieving those goals.
Thank you very much. Sounds like it is a region of hope, the hope for also, all of the world, all the partners to work together. Thank you very much, all the excellent and distinguished speakers for having this special session today. Could I invite the floor to join me by thanking all the speakers here?